do it because mine's not online. Mine is on. Do you think it'd be better if I put it online? I just usually have it on. I just have it on my computer, but it seems to like when you have things online.
It should be fine either way, but whatever's easier for you.
Entire screen. I think I would just put it online because it seems to like when you have things on a tab. So I will do that.
And Stuart, I assume our PowerPoints will be loaded in. We send them to Ann.
I looked at yours this morning, so I think yours are there.
Okay.
There's a link on our invitation that will take you to this page, which will take you to more information, and that's where your PowerPoint was.
Now, will this, can I do it where I don't show my face?
You can if you want.
How do I do that?
So up there where there is like a camera symbol and a microphone symbol, you'll just click that camera symbol and it should turn off your camera.
Okay.
Of course, we'd love to see you, Sharon, but you can, anything you are comfortable with is fine with us.
Okay.
And if you're sharing a presentation, it'll be on the screen mostly, so you just be a little box down in the corner anyway.
Okay. Okay. I like that.
Juan, do you have a title that you'd like for me to share?
Oh, of the presentation?
No, yeah, I've got your presentation title. Do you have a personal title that you'd like for me to share?
Oh no, just Juan is fine. I mean, I technically have a Bachelor of Science, but that's, you know, I'm not. I would never use it formally. So Juan is just fine.
Okay, and I am. How would you like for me to introduce you?
So I'm actually currently a graduate student, if you would like to include that.
Oh, okay. At Virginia Tech?
No, I'm actually at St. Joseph's University. I just graduated from Tech in 2020. I'm actually out of Appalachian, unfortunately. But I was a student archivist at Special Collections for 2 years. And I did a lot of research, which led me to being a guest member of the Virginia Tech Council on History. So that's what they're like, hey, I know you graduated, but you should do this presentation. So if you would like to do that, that's totally fine.
Okay, that sounds great. So you were a student archivist while at Virginia Tech?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Congratulations on graduating, Juan. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. It was no small feat during a pandemic, but I
What are you studying at St. Joseph's?
I'm actually surprisingly completely flipped the script. I'm actually getting my master's in experimental psychology.
Great.
So I'm definitely more of like a history by hobby that keeps me sane, while everything else is more or less doing something completely different. But so whenever I was like, yeah, I have to present at a conference today, and they're like, oh, really? Like, what did you publish? I'm like, it is nothing. Absolutely, it's my prior life. It's not. It's not sacrilege.
If it makes you feel any better, I'm technically a mathematician, so.
We are really happy that you are going to be sharing your experiences at Virginia Tech today. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. I miss history and talking about it quite a bit. So thank you so much for even considering me.
Absolutely.
Our tech person, what's your name?
My name is Grant. It says James, but I go by Grant, which is my middle name.
Okay. I was just wondering if I should. Never mind, it's too late to do it now.
Is this for each of us, is this our first time presenting on Teams?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, we're all in this new. I've never been a convener before, nor have I done anything on Teams like this. So this, that means this beginner's luck, right? We're keeping those fingers crossed, beginner's luck.
That's the best kind of luck.
Yeah. And Grant, let me ask you, when the clock hits 10:30, should I start, or when should I open? What should I do to open the session? We're at 10:30 now.
Yeah, just whenever you're ready. Now, here in a second, just go ahead and begin however you'd like.
Okay, and I was just looking to see, can I see who all is attending or not?
Click the participant tab, Stuart. It looks like two little people, and then it'll show you on the side who everybody is.
Oh, okay, great. All right.
I suggest leaving that up, and it makes it easy.
Okay, great.
Grant, you want to go and unshare that screen for Stuart?
Okay, great. That looks good. Thank you. All right. Then I guess I'll start since we're at 10:30. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stuart Pline. I'm the curator of Rare Books, Printed Resources, and Appalachian Collection at West Virginia University. I'd like to welcome you to the ASA Special Collections Committee panel, Reclaiming the Edifice, Restorative Justice, and the Archives. Before we begin, I'd like to share a little information about the Special Collections Committee and today's panel. The committee was formed in order to connect archivists and special collections librarians in Appalachia and to promote special collections throughout the region. Restorative justice as a concept seeks to find solutions to difficult problems rooted in systemic racism. Today's panel, Reclaiming the Edifice, Restorative Justice, and the Archives, hosts 4 speakers from 3 regional institutions, the University of North Carolina at Asheville, Berea College, and Virginia Tech, who will address this important topic through their institutional archival lens. Our first presentation, Restorative Justice and Archives, Using Archival Evidence to examine the legacy of Asheville's urban renewal programs will be brought to us by Gene Hyde, head of UNCA Special Collections, and Patrick Balls, Honors Director and Professor of Mathematics, also at UNCA. And if you would, please post any questions in the chat box, and we'll have time to address those at the end of the session. Thank you. Gene and Patrick.
Okay. Do we have our slides somewhere? While those are coming up, welcome everybody. I'm Gene Hyde. I'm head of special collections at UNC Asheville, and I'm here with my colleague Patrick Balls. And today there are folks who are not here with us. Part of this work we've been doing is with some people in the community. Unfortunately, like a lot of folks, UNC Asheville has had COVID restrictions, and we're not allowed to have anybody other than students, faculty, and staff here. So Patrick will talk some about the folks that we've been working with in the community, or else we would have some of those here with us. Patrick?
Yeah. Do you want me to give a little intro right now?
Just
Gene? Yeah, just to say thank you, Gene, and I'll piggyback off of Gene's going to give us a little introduction to the archival holdings and talk about how we came to have those, and I'll follow up with conversation about our collaboration with the Racial Justice Coalition and others on and off campus as we look at the legacy of urban renewal.
Thank you, Patrick. So what we're going to do here is quickly look at some of the history of the Black community in Asheville, at redlining and how the Black communities were identified, a brief look at the state of Black Asheville during urban renewal, and then we'll take a look at the records we've been using, the urban renewal records from the Housing Authority of the City of Asheville. Patrick will then talk again about reparations and using the urban renewal records for that and some of his classes and the research he's been doing. And we'll wrap it up by talking about some of the research of one of our colleagues, Kathleen Lawler, who will be doing a lot of work with these records too. Can we have the next slide? This is the 1937 redlining map that was put together by the Homeowners Loan Corporation to, quote, identify, quote, residential security. And the residential security, the red line maps, as you can see here, are pretty much mapped then and now, the Black communities within Asheville. The large Y-shaped one you see in the middle here includes two communities, East Riverside and the East End Valley Street community. It sort of forms a big Y, and in the middle of that Y is what is downtown Asheville. This area here was site of one of the largest urban renewal projects in the Southeast. We could have the next slide. At the time of urban renewal, Asheville had a thriving Black community. The 1970 census, as the terminology went then, Negro or other races, numbered 10,671, which was 18.2% of Asheville's total population. At this point in time now, due to gentrification and other things, that's the Black population is down to about 13% of the city's total population. But at the time, it was a very thriving series of communities. It had a major commercial district downtown, which was known as the Block. These three photos here were just random snapshots that Isaiah Rice took at the Block to show you how robust things were. This was daily life there. These are from the late 50s and very early 60s. But as you can see, this was a very, very thriving community. Can we have our next slide? As I mentioned, the urban renewal projects in the East End, Valley Street area and East Riverside were immense. They affected well over 1,000 households, and it's been estimated approximately 50% of the Black community in Asheville. We have the Housing Authority of the City of Asheville records here. We got them kind of accidentally. The city didn't really know what to do with them, and they had moved them into the basement of a hotel. Whereas somebody who was very active with city housing issues found them there. And through a process, these are public records because they belong and were created by the City of Asheville. They were officially transferred over by a vote of the Asheville City Council to UNC Asheville's special collections. They are, it's 165 linear feet. It's a very large collection. And what we are very lucky about is there's retention schedules in the state of North Carolina that say what things should be destroyed by cities. Fortunately, these were largely ignored. So what we have is great detail about records that probably would not have made it had the retention schedule been followed and had they been destroyed. For each property, and there's over 1,000, there's acquisition and appraisal records where they were going out and looking at the properties, disposition records, what finally happened with the properties, and relocation records, which will say what happened to the individuals who were in those properties or own those properties. So we can track in great detail for each property and each individual or family that lived there how the bureaucratic process of urban renewal worked in terms of appraising what they had, taking what they had or buying it from them, and relocating people. And we believe that due to the size and depth of this is a relatively unique set of urban renewal records. And the fact that it happened in a town relatively small like Asheville is pretty amazing. Part of what we do here as the Public Liberal Arts University is we try to make sure that our primary sources are used by faculty for teaching purposes and for research purposes. And Patrick Balls and I have had a relationship doing both of these things. It's going on for a couple of years now. So I think it's a good time to turn it over to Patrick.
Great. Thanks, Gene, for that introduction. A number of the characteristics of these particular holdings are what make them really useful for the work that we're doing right now. I'll just say a few quick words about the class that I've taught a couple of times now. I'm a relative latecomer to the idea of urban renewal, something I learned about initially 8 or 9 years ago. While teaching a senior capstone course at our university, which included a unit on urban renewal, reading Mindy Thompson Fullalov's book, Root Shock, which I recommend as a really good introduction to the topic. This was a first-year seminar course where I had my students come in and learn some of the basics of archival research from Gene and his staff. And then the students would pair up and be assigned a single property to look into the history of that property, to understand how urban renewal impacted the families, the homeowners, the tenants of these properties, and where they went and how they were treated in that process. Indeed, I think one of the big pieces of information that is missing from the story of urban renewal in terms of just layperson's understanding of this, very often you see a description of the high-level federal policies, like the Housing Act of 1949 and 54, the Highway Act of 56, and then you immediately fast forward to the destruction of communities that happened because of urban renewal. But missing from that is a description of how those federal policies, guidelines, all those documents were able to, how they informed the ways that cities implemented urban renewal. And I think our records are doing a really good job of painting that picture and in turn enabling us to look at, in particular, at the role of discretion, the ability of individual people to make decisions based on the guidelines they were given, and how that discretion, much as it is in the case in criminal justice, much as it is in electoral law, how that discretion given to human individuals can have a discriminatory impact on the way that policies are implemented. But that's just one of the many ways that these archives are helping us right now to work with the community to restore and offer remuneration and reparation. As Gene mentioned, we have a number of folks in the community, Rob Thomas, David Greenson, Marie Mosen, and others working with the Racial Justice Coalition in Asheville, who are daily just responding in real time to the community's needs, in particular to the actions of our city council. So the city of Asheville still owns a good deal of the property that was claimed under urban renewal over the decades that the process was performed in Asheville. And city council often has actions. There was a vote earlier this year, as many of you know, to explore reparations, and a moratorium was placed on the sale of city lands. But the city is contemplating sale and contemplating reuse of various parcels of land that we are able to research using these archives and forestall the city in any efforts to change ownership of that land, with the hope that ultimately the sale or repurpose of that land will benefit reparations efforts. excuse me, there are a number of other things that we're doing right now. I'm working on collecting oral history, guided in part by these archives, to identify the folks who were directly impacted, to try to seek out and collect stories from people who may have gone unrecognized or unacknowledged at this point. I'm working with a couple of other community members like Andrea Clark. Jean, a few slides back, showed us some photos from the Isaiah Rice collection in the 50s and 60s. In the 1970s, a woman named Andrea Clark was responsible for taking hundreds of photos of the East End Valley Street neighborhood that was impacted by urban renewal. And her photographic record is one of the richest we have. She is fortunately still with us, and I've been partnering with her to investigate her family's history in that neighborhood, which goes back almost 100 years, and to understand the chain of property, the chain of ownership of that property as an exemplary case of what happened in that neighborhood. We're also able to put together a dispersion map. As Jean mentioned, we have such detailed holdings that we're able to see where people were displaced to when urban renewal hit. And we're hoping that creating some sort of interactive visual representation of that dispersion of the community will really give a jarring and a striking sense to people in the community as to what happened to these neighborhoods when they were impacted. And in closing, I'll just mention real quickly, Jean mentioned our colleague Kathleen Lawler in the economics department has just started research with some of her students into hedonic analysis, which is an in-depth means of essentially estimating the worth or the value of a particular property based on characteristics like number of rooms, number of bedrooms, stuff like that. Her hope is to go through the appraisals that we have in these holdings and get some sense of how valuable these properties would be if they were for sale today. Like if the owners, that the tenants had access to the monies that would enable them to keep them in good repair, how much would they be worth today rather than being dispossessed? And this in turn will give us some sense of the value, the literal dollars and cents value of wealth that was lost by the Black community, again, supporting the community's efforts to enact reparations for the descendants of slaves in the area. So it's a multi-pronged approach. We're looking at a number of different quantitative and qualitative means of using these archives to great value as we look forward to reparations in our community.
I just want to add a little bit about Kathleen Lawler. We heard yesterday that she was appointed the Brennan Professor of Social Science Research here, which means that she has funding to bring 2 students in over the upcoming 4 semesters to do this research with this archival material, which is a great boost to her, and we look forward to working with those students in the archives. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I'd like to third that if I can. Thank you so much, Patrick and Jean, for bringing us that really fascinating presentation. And I'd like to introduce Sharon Mitchell. Sharon Mitchell brings us our second presentation today, the Berea Monuments Initiative, Reclaiming Our History. Sharon is the Research Services Specialist at Berea College. Take it away, Sharon.
We will see. How are you doing today? The first thing I need to do is present a disclaimer. I'm not an archivist nor a librarian, and therefore I can't speak for them, but I've been nosy all my life and have worked in the public, private, legal, and academic libraries across the state. I've got nearly 50 years of research experience, so I can speak in generalities to the value and the challenges found in libraries. Now, if you'll hold on just a minute, and then I'll figure out the next thing I'm supposed to do here. Can you see this okay?
We're not seeing these slides yet.
Okay. Are we okay now?
No, I'm not seeing them. I think if you hit that share tray, this box with the arrow in the center.
Sorry. It says it's sharing, but
I don't see it. Grant, if you're there, can you help us with this?
Wait, here it comes.
We don't have
Okay,
the file.
great.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Great, thank you.
okay.
It's coming in really slowly. There we go.
Okay. Until you've probably heard the story of the lion and the hunter, and until the lion is able to tell his own story, it's always glorified by the version from the hunter. So this is what I want to tell you today, is that I'm like the lion. I've been interested in telling the other side of the story. So within our tiny metropolis of Berea, 15,000, the Berea College Archives plays a pivotal role in documenting the histories of the college, the town, and its hundreds and sometimes thousands, maybe, of people of color. Its institutional memory bank is only documented. It is the institutional memory bank for a population which is only slightly documented in the history of Madison County and in the formation of the Commonwealth. I'll be talking about 3 highway markers who tell our stories within the County of Madison and with the assistance of our archives. The first marker is the site of the Middletown Consolidated School. The Middletown School was a consolidated school from 3 Black schools that were one room, basically shack type buildings, and therefore they were not the best as far as structural. So in 1927, Rosenwald, Julius Rosenwald, who was a philanthropist, contributed funds along with the city, the county, and the community to build a new building. The dedication ceremonies were heralded by state, local, and religious dignitaries and the bigwigs of the town. It was held as a red letter day as the Black and white communities celebrated the state-of-the-art facility. Its teachers were college educated. They were the sons and daughters of former slaves. Its campus held a bell that was said to have rung at Camp Nelson in Civil War days. And if we fast forward to Brown versus Board, some 36 years later, the symbiotic relationship between the town and the college and the Black community was severed. By law, it was required that a separate but equal education be provided for all of Kentucky's children. But the Jim Crow laws in effect allowed for separate but unequal treatment. The books for the colored schools were secondhand, they were used, they were written in, and pages were torn out. The promised library never materialized.
Grant, are you able to move the slides forward?
I am not able to.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Is this moving them now?
It's on the title slide at the moment.
Okay. I'm going to get some assistance here. Hold on, just I can't see what I'm doing wrong. It's not showing. Okay. Is that, or is it doing it now?
Yes, we're on the Middletown School slide now.
Okay, so hit it from here. Okay. Okay, gotcha. Okay, sorry about that, y'all. This is my first Zoom, so I am somewhat handicapped. Anyway, this is a picture of the Middletown School as it was refurbished. When the equipment wore out in 1927, state-of-the-art furnace, it wore out, but when it was replaced with a pot-bellied stove. The water lines that were run, but the indoor plumbing never did materialize until the doors closed in 1963. The students were still using outdoor toilets. Teachers who taught students who excelled academically, sometimes held master's degrees, were compelled to retire or to retrain as librarians. They were not allowed to teach those white kids. Now, when we're looking at restorative justice, one of the things I looked at was equity versus equality. So what's the difference? Equality is about dividing the resources in matching amounts. Equity forces more dividing proportionately to achieve a fair outcome. So this forgotten schoolhouse in the shadow of Berea College was eventually resurrected due to the efforts of historians who dug into the Black history of the archives and uncovered its rich history. Now it's home to over 300 employees who bring educational opportunities and history to counties in eastern Kentucky. 50 years later, in 2016, as those first graduates turned 60, Middletown held its first reunion. Attendees included religious leaders, politicians, school principals, corporate executives, legal and medical professionals. Many were first in their fields. Today, a Commonwealth of Kentucky highway marker recognizes the significance of Middletown. It's a success story that can be told when the line writes the history. It's a history that's uncovered in the courthouses, the libraries, and the archives of Berea College, but it's been hiding in plain sight. Racial segregation was illegal. Slavery was illegal, but both were crimes. And they were crimes against humanity. Crimes which require that we right the wrong, not only with equality, but with equity and justice.
Experience here was fantastic, and I'll always say that these were the greatest teachers I've ever had.
5 years ago, I was invited to an event at Boonesboro. And this is the second marker, and really the one that I'd like to talk about that got me started on the hunt. It is the site of the second fort established in what is now Kentucky. At the entrance to the recreated fort is a tall, maybe 30-foot obelisk engraved on all sides with names. There are approximately 600 names on this tower. And the title or the caption for this marker is called The Descendants of Boonesboro. Well, I knew my great-great-grandparents had grown up within a few miles. In fact, just across the river at Ford, and up the river, up the road at Whitehall. So I asked kind of naively, which ones were Black or African American on here? And my jaw dropped when I was told that none. So out of 600 and some people, there were no Blacks listed on any of the four sides. And when I asked why, it was explained that there was no way to identify those early African American settlers, as they were slaves and had no names. So most of you know that Africans were enslaved, brought to this continent, shackled hand and foot with iron collars around their necks. To stop communication, they were deliberately separated from tribal members who spoke different languages. So they were stripped of their names. They were stripped of their names. They were renamed and they were given names. Through the years, this continues in more subtle ways. No name, just uncle or boy or those people. Anything but a name. Incidentally or coincidentally, those hundreds of names on that tower and monument at the fort are echoed on the tombstones in our African American graveyards across the state. We can't be added to this monument because we are unnamed. So on a whim, I looked up the sponsors. The Society of Boonesboro was founded in 1975. Now that's not 1875, it's not 1775. We're talking about 1975. But to be eligible for membership, you had to include your lineal descendants of pioneers who were at Boonesboro from 1775 to 1810. And get this, they had to be listed in source material by name. Well, as of this date, as of today, I've been unable to identify any person of color that is a member of this organization. Again, who wrote the source material? The white men. In this country, the creators of original records are general white, Anglo-Saxon men. Courthouses, libraries, museums, and religious institutions are the originators. And until people of all ethnicities, gender inclusive and racially balanced, have a seat at the conference tables and in the boardrooms, our stories will continue to be written by the hunter. The lion's share of our story is only beginning to be told. Marker number 3. Well, I ventured down to the original fort site. There, a four-sided monument with bronze plaques had been installed. This was in recognition of the axemen and the Indian fighters who had cleared the land for the white men. I mean, that's what it says, including a Negro man and a Negro woman. Personally, I think it is ironic that the daughters of the American Revolution, who are able to trace their lineage to George Washington, to King Henry VIII, and Mary Queen of Scots, could not dignify nor identify one Negro man nor one Negro woman with a name. These were the ones who did the heavy lifting. They cut the trees, they broke the virgin soil, they planted and tended the crops.
And in accordance with university policy, masks are required.
As of this date, I've been unable to identify a person of color in the groups. Last month, I revisited the site and I took a picture, and there was the marker covered with a blue tarp. At first, I thought it had been vandalized, but I later learned that no, the state had removed the marker for fear of it being vandalized. Its language had contained offensive, had offensive language on it. So I wanted to know what the offensive language was, and basically, it's what we said. The people had come to establish this marker for the purpose for the white men. Now, this is the same language of over 70 years. So my question is, what is the solution? Cover it up, remove it, add supplemental language? I'm not sure what the answer is. I wonder what the state's going to do to reconcile this dilemma. What is restorative justice? Will the state do the right thing? Will it be just and fair? As a researcher and as a genealogist, I get kind of tired of hearing people say, well, those people didn't keep records. They didn't have names. Those people couldn't read or write. Or more recently, those people just don't care about their history. To this, I say bullpucking. Our history is found in your books, your Bibles, your diaries, and in our libraries. Our history may be oral and it's classified sometimes as folklore, but hard is not impossible. So those people have names. It's important to any discussion of justice, restorative justice, to say the names, to incorporate the names, to recognize there is dignity and identity and worth associated with a name. To refuse to voice that name is an effort to control, and I think a crime. I'm often asked, what do you want to be called? How about just call me by my name? But my usual answer is that depends. It depends on who's asking the question, what time period are we referencing, and who is the audience. For my parents who were born in the 20s, they were not Black, neither were they African American. They were Negro with a capital N, but they were often referred to as colored, and they called themselves colored. My children who were born in the 70s are highly upset when referred to as colored. So it depends. Recently, I spoke with an archivist, and she related how her staff was referred to as so many people and two others. Who were the others? Now, as far as the archives is concerned, what do you call it? What's the name I'm looking for? It depends on what kind of record and where it's found. A might be for African or African American, B for Black or boy, C for colored or copper, D for darky, I for Indian, N for Negro, the N word, or none of the above. We can be found indexed in the center of the book, the back of the book, or not at all. Unfortunately, this naming methodology also applies to women, and it is prevalent in libraries and archives too. I've searched for hours for articles or records generated by Mrs. John Doe. Mrs. John Doe. She had a name, but even she signed herself as Mrs. John Doe. How records are kept is problematic. So this goes to the archives and location. Usually that refers to real estate, but indexing and tagging and metadata and table of contents, inventory, finding aids, subject headings, these terms are all referring to the same thing, and that has to do with location. So what do you call it? Where is it stored? How do you find it? Is it in an understandable language? Metadata may as well be gibberish or Swahili or gobbledygook if you don't know what it means. Always remember, the lion and the hunter tell a different story. Now this leads me to another who. Who processed the records? Who entered the data? What was their frame of reference? Hundreds of photographers are documented hundreds of photos by a prolific Appalachian photographer here. His collection, if it weren't noted in the collection by event, time, and place, would it be as useful as a finding aid? Would it be useful? Would it be as useful as finding a nail in my junk drawer? Was it a riot, a protest, or a march? A coal mine or a salt mine? Were they Black or African American, or were they just coal miners returning from their shift? Or were they both? So who determines what is important? Which leads me to personnel. Understaffed, underpaid, and vanilla. People tend to go with what they know and who they know. There are less than 10 Black archivists in Kentucky. Could that be a reason our archives don't reflect reality? I didn't get the racial breakdown, but you can't teach what you don't know. When memorials, markers, and documents were created is important. Jim Crow laws and Southern sympathizers were afraid that their history would be lost. So organizations like the DAR, they sprang up after the wars, and they were based on trying to be sure that the heritage, their history, wasn't lost. Most of the Confederate monuments that we hear about making news today now, they weren't erected after the Civil War, but between 1890 and 1950, with the majority of them being erected in the 1920s and 30s, just like the markers here. So those markers that were established near the end of the war, they were basically named for their leaders, and they were found in cemeteries. The others, the more recent ones, are in public places like the city squares and state buildings. It's ironic, again, they're there in the halls of justice. Now, I said all this to say this: it's important to know who kept the records, where they're kept, are they accessible? Is the information current? Is it relevant? Is it accurate? Is it based on fact? Is it current, accurate, relevant, equitable? Who cares? Justice is doing what's morally right and fair. It's doing the right thing and will only be achieved when the lion and the hunter are at the same table. I have a brief excerpt here from Rachel Grimes, and she did a video, Finding a Founding Mother, and it follows the story of one of the first African American women in Kentucky. She released this video some time ago, but she's done a short, and I'd like to share that with you. But it's there. Since I've been working on this project, I found other places that people think about. So it's brought to somebody's attention that there were little blacks shown down at Boonesboro. That brought to their attention that the records that nobody's looked at. Part of the story that concerns the controlling. Right. Okay, we'll stop it. Okay.
No matter what time you go, 9 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Bill and I talked about it.
I understand the audio's not coming through. So we're going to.
Dedicated clientele. So this is called South.
I don't remember. Are you on a Mac or are you on a PC?
That's. I'll stop it.
Something about these lake towns.
Did it stop?
So she ended up here dancing for the town.
It's still coming through in the background. The faint sound.
From the Queen of Hearts parking lot, you
I can't stop it.
from the sound to the Trinity Steel factories. The closing is heard.
Shut me off.
Before I get down, Salad is there. Small talk tries to convince me she's thinking of going back to college. When I offer her a 5, she asks, how about bigger space? Stick your neck out, she says. I laugh and offer her a cigarette and pause as I see her eyeing my pulsing throat with powerful attraction. Before I moved to Butler, where I am now, I lived outside of Ithaca, New York, a really rural place. And one of the baby changes that happened when I moved back to Butler is that suddenly Halloween was a thing again, with little kids skirling everywhere and getting candy. So the day after the last non-pandemic Halloween.
Okay, sorry, I had to find where that audio was coming from. So it looks like she left the meeting. So whoever wants to pick up back wherever you guys are going to go next. You're muted.
Thank you, the classic line. Thank you, Grant. I'd like to thank Sharon for her moving and illuminating talk, and then I'd like to introduce Juan. Our third presentation, Confronting Our Legacy at Virginia Tech, The Struggle Over Lee Hall, will be presented by Ron Pacheco. He is currently enrolled in a Master's of Experimental Psychology at St. Joseph's University. He's a recent graduate of Virginia Tech, where he served as a student archivist. So he'll be bringing his presentation on his archival work at Virginia Tech. Thank you, Juan.
Hello, can everyone see everything? Okay, can you see my slides by chance?
Yes,
we can see it.
All right, fantastic. Okay, please play. All right, why are you not playing? All right, fantastic. All right, sorry, you can still see the slides, right?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm so sorry about that. All right, hello everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Juan Pacheco. As Stuart said, I'm a recent graduate of Virginia Tech and former student archivist for Virginia Tech Special Collections and University Archive. And today I'm going to be presenting on the controversy over the formerly named Lee Hall. So I know some of you may be wondering or thinking in your mind, the last name Lee in Virginia, of course, that's a subject of controversy. And I would say you are correct. But that's not the Lee I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about Claudius Lee, born in 1872 in Culpeper Courthouse, Virginia. At a young age, his family relocated to Pittsylvania County, Virginia. And for those unfamiliar with the local geography, that is the county that surrounds the independent city of Danville, coincidentally where Lee attended secondary school at Danville Military Institute. He then went on to begin his undergraduate career at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania, and then was more or less recruited to attend Virginia Agricultural and Mechanical College, known today as Virginia Tech. So as a student, Claudius found himself involved in many extracurricular activities, as well as leadership positions. He is also credited with aiding in the establishment of the university's physics laboratory. Excuse me. while pursuing his undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, and is also known for being the editor-in-chief of the 1896 yearbook, also called the Bugle, and this is quite important. So in adulthood, Claudius proceeded to bring the university and the town of Blacksburg into the 20th century. He aided in the installment of the first telephone switchboard, bringing electric light to both the town and the university. He served as the superintendent of the campus power plant and served the university in various roles for nearly 70 years, and 50 of those he spent as a professor of engineering. So, to understand why Lee is a figure of controversy, one must go back to the Bugle yearbook to see what other things Claudius credited himself with being a part of during his time at VAMC. So to provide some institutional context to the college at the time, it was an all-white, all-male military institution. Many of its first leaders were affiliated with the Confederate Army in some way. A popular student publication was called the Gray Jacket, and the school colors were not the great maroon and orange we are known for today, but rather gray and black, undoubtedly paying homage to the garb and colors of the Confederate Army. So when we look into this book, it's not surprising that we would find dapper drawings of General Robert E. Lee, or tasteless caricatures of black figures on student club pages, or a misogynistic poem like this one entitled Shackles, where you can find quotes that state, flies and mosquitoes, like women, have their proper place in life, or trust not a woman even when she is dead. So it began with a class assignment. So Professor of History Peter Wallenstein assigned his class a research project to go into special collections, look into the old yearbooks, and see what was in them. And what was found by those students changed the discourse of Virginia Tech student activism permanently. So the Ku Klux Klan was said to be a student club in the 1896 yearbook in the 1895-1896 school year. I provided some things in larger font for those that may not be able to see. In the drawing, you will find the phrase, "the few and faithful KKK." Favorite amusement listed as midnight field sports, and Claudius Lee listed as the father of terror. And I wish I could say that was the worst of it. I would like to forewarn everyone that although this is published in the yearbook, some of you may find the following graphic disturbing. This was the Pittsylvania County Club page. It was not uncommon for students at the time to form clubs paying homage to where they come from, and many different cities and counties were represented. Here we'll find a drawing of a black man hanging from a tree with the club motto listed as "Hang 'em." And here you will see Claudius Lee's membership listed twice in this page. So as a student archivist for most of my junior year and my senior year, I have spent a great deal of time with this particular volume. And I would like to just share some notes of observations that I have made, at least at my as my time at Virginia Tech. So the first thing I would like to point out is the Ku Klux Klan was only listed as a student organization in the academic year 1895 to 1896, when Claudius Lee was editor-in-chief and a senior. Never did this ever pop up again in any other yearbook. This is the only club to list a founding date within the yearbook. And I found that rather peculiar, considering that the school year began in September in 1895. Upon looking at the date, there was nothing significant about October 17th, 1895. However, a year prior, in Fayette County, Ohio, on October 17th, 1894, a black man allegedly admitted to raping a white woman in Fayette County, Ohio, which led to local outrage and leading to a mob planning to lynch the man outside of the courthouse. William McKinley, who was governor of Ohio at the time prior to his presidency, called in the guard to protect the black man from what would be a lynching death. As the mob outside attempted to breach the courthouse, the guard fired, and it is documented that around 6 people died and 12 were injured, although various sources have different numbers of deaths and injuries. And lastly, although not specifically in 1896, the Klan absolutely had a presence in Blacksburg and in and around Montgomery County and the New River Valley. And again, these are just some notes of observations I have made, and take with this what you will. Secondly, analyzing the Pittsylvania County Club page, I would like to make it known that Pittsylvania County was especially notorious for lynchings and as well as racial tensions throughout its history. And we can see this displayed when above in the diagram, as the drawing goes out of the field of view, you can see 2 additional pairs of legs on trees. And secondly, there was 2 documented lynchings prior to the year 1896. The first one of a man named Thomas Pannell or Pamil. It is listed as 2 different spellings. There is unknown allegation and unknown reason. The secondly is the lynching death of George Towler. Now, what's especially interesting about the lynching of George Towler is this gained quite a bit of tension as it showed up in the Roanoke Times, the Richmond Dispatch it is now Richmond Times Dispatch, and even reached newspapers as far as Canada. The death of George Towler was rather infamous because Towler lived in the home of a well-known farmer in Pittsylvania County in the Tunstall District named David Mitchell. The Mitchell daughter accused Towler of attempting miscegenation with her, which then her 2 brothers and a local, where this was indirectly quoting from Richmond Dispatch, led him to the woods and swung him by a tree. Although they were arrested for the death of George Towler, a jury of their peers acquitted them. Again, take with all of this what you will. George Towler and Claudius Lee were roughly the same age and also both lived in the Tunstall District at the time. So a little bit more than 100 years later from the publishing of this yearbook, this is the fight for the removal of the name of Lee Hall. So in 1997, as this came out from Dr. Wallenstein's class, student outrage soon followed, specifically among minority students, and national attention as well. The New York Times, this is, you can see a headline on the top right. President Torgerson at the time released, named a committee of 2 Black historians and Dr. Peter Wallenstein as well to investigate. During this investigation, a Ku Klux Klan expert and historian was consulted, and the report came back inconclusive, as the expert also said that the KKK was not active in the local area at the time. However, to more or less appease students, a VP of Multicultural Affairs was then appointed in that year. So in the early 2000s, Charles Steger was now named university president as of 2000, and diversity issues were listed as one of his top priorities. In 2003, the university attempted to ban affirmative action priority practices as far as employment and admission. Many student activists met this with extreme backlash, and this was later reversed. Later that year, following in the next fall semester, Pedro Yates Hall, named for Irving Pedro and Charlie Yates, the first 2 Black male students to attend Virginia Tech, was erected. And following the next year, a hate crime occurred on the campus of Virginia Tech, where the office door of the campus NAACP was desecrated. And this led to the more or less the catalyzing of student activist groups such as the Direct Resistance of Privilege Alliance, or the DROP Alliance, as they reignited this fight for the changing of Lee Hall's name, among other issues as far as faculty of color retention, as well as student retention. So there were many peaks and valleys, if you will, to the fight for the removal of Lee Hall but nothing exactly stuck until the summer of 2020, where the death of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd led to an inflection point around the nation of various institutions. There was a petition then began circling online of various students and alumni, and the university committee pushed for the removal of Lee Hall's name, and this gained a little bit more than 13,000 signatures. President Sands, in response, called for the Council on History, which is a group of academics, historians, and various others that investigate the university's history, decide what should be celebrated, looked at, and also evaluate things like building names. I was very privileged to be a guest voter on this Council on History. And within that, Berenger Hall was also came under immense scrutiny, as Paul Berenger was the president of Virginia Tech for a short time, but is also a well-known eugenicist. On the top left, you'll see a copy of the cover of his book, The American Negro, His Past and Future. Berenger was a well-known eugenicist and advocated for eugenics as an answer to the quote-unquote Negro problem in America. Following some deliberation, the Council on History eventually voted unanimously to rename both buildings, and the Board of Visitors followed suit within the next month. So today in 2021, Berenger Hall is now Whitehurst Hall. And James Whitehurst was the first Black member of the Board of Visitors, named in 1970. And Lee Hall is now Hoag Hall. Hoag is named for actually two individuals, a Black local couple in Blacksburg who opened their home in the 50s and 60s for Black students that were not allowed to live on campus but needed a place to stay. So some final thoughts in here. I want to first say that without the archive, in the spirit of this panel, the full scope of institutional identity is lost without understanding the scope, and healing cannot begin. Secondly, Appalachian academic spaces have the ability to cultivate better understanding. And although the institution that these spaces can be found in have not always prioritized equity, Appalachian academic spaces, due to circumstance of their own location, have made a legacy of their own, especially in modern day, of treating oppression, social justice, liberation as subjects of pedagogy and something that can be applied. And lastly, legacy is fluid, and the scope of one's legacy is subjective. And although I have made some enemies with my place in research or voting with the Council on History, I try to remind folks that monuments themselves are fluid and take many different shapes. And in saying that, I mean Blacksburg still has electric lighting, and that should be of no surprise to anyone. And the campus power plant still stands today. And we can appreciate the compliments of an individual, but keeping the name of dormitories of students of all races where they seek safety, a place to study, a place to live, in an already quite homogeneous campus environment that can sometimes have instances of great adversity is not the way to honor a legacy. Before I click off, on the bottom right, this is you can see a picture of a smiling, I believe that is student Lindsay Cherry, was also one of the first Black students to attend Virginia Tech. He's actually in the Hoag home here, which is a very awesome picture. And then to the left, you will see James Whitehurst on the Board of Visitors. So, all right, thank you so much.
Stuart, you're muted.
Thank you, and thank you, Juan, for that terrific presentation. I'd like to open the floor to chat, to questions, if I may. Okay. I'd like to ask a question. I've got one for Jean and Patrick. Patrick, in particular, I'd like to ask you about the appraising, buying, or taking property, relocating people, and how students were engaged in that project. How were they engaged, and how did that affect them being engaged in that project?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I was always intrigued to see, especially since these were first-year students, they were new to the university and new to the community. I think for one of the biggest reactions I got from students, or one of the best outcomes, I think, was that it enabled them very quickly to feel a sense of purpose in the community and a connection with it that many of their peers would not have, because it was looking very much at the local, and they came to see themselves as a part of something bigger than just a place to be for the next 4 years. They were very moved by some of the stories they saw. Gene and his assistants did a wonderful job of doing some pre-work with the archives to find files that they knew would have some level of completeness, so that the students would see a full picture from acquisition, excuse me, from appraisal and then subsequent acquisition and relocation. And most of these, I think the students were particularly intrigued by the very personal nature and the very idiosyncratic nature of some of these files. So stories like seeing the displacees doing back of the napkin calculations as to how much mortgage they could afford if they were to, purchase or be assisted in purchasing a home elsewhere in the community, or seeing correspondence between the residents and the housing authority of the city of Asheville. These were very personal and moving documents, and I think the students got a lot out of that. And I think one of the things, as I mentioned before, one of the things I think that's missing from the public-facing layperson literature is just an in-depth description of how this process happened. I think we see a high level and we see the end result, but we don't see the intricacies of the process. As you mentioned, the appraisal, the acquisition, the relocation, all of this was done very methodically and according to federal guidelines that were established by the Housing and Urban Affairs and later Housing and Urban Development Department. But how exactly they were implemented from town to town, and the fact that they were implemented by real flesh and blood human beings, I think left a lot of room for discretionary practices. And I gestured toward this earlier, but anytime, I think Michelle Alexander, for instance, in her work, The New Jim Crow, did a really good job of pointing out how in criminal justice, the role of discretion from arrest through arraignment and beyond really has a discriminatory effect aggregately. And I think we're seeing the same thing in this housing policy. It's nothing surprising, but I think the archives really help us to quantify and make concrete that discrimination.
Well, I think you raised a good point there, which is we can see the beginning and we can see the end of this, but the middle, which is the real human interaction, is not there. But thanks to these great archives, we're able to uncover that, and that's really important to illuminate the people that are involved in that were involved in this action.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, just watching the students, Patrick's students would come in, they'd have these long projects, they would come in teams, and the amount of emotional reaction that they would have when they would dig in and they would find like a letter from someone who was fighting the city about buying their property. This predated the classes when we did a final level of arrangement and description where students were going down to the folder level and going through to make sure anything that needed to be redacted was redacted. I'd have the students processing who would stop me and with just indignation when they would see what was going on to individuals and how they were affected by the process. So there is when you dig in at this level, thanks to the depth of these archives, there's a very emotional impact that it has. Just people studying it and trying to translate that into the lives of the people affected is part of what Patrick's doing now with this oral history project.
Well, I have to admit, I felt that emotion just listening to both of you talk about this project. And Jean, there were sort of the three prongs: the redlining, the urban renewal, and the gentrification. Those three steps that really named for moving that process along.
Yeah. And when you drive through the bypass in Asheville today, you are largely driving through African-American neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much. Anyone else have a question?
I've got one for Juan if no one else does.
Great, go right ahead.
Yeah, so Juan, I'm really glad that you had a chance as a student to be on the committee, the renaming committee at Virginia Tech, and that's an awesome responsibility and a fantastic opportunity. I was wondering if Virginia Tech, I know for instance, Yale University with their renaming came up with a list of like criteria or guidelines to sort of follow. Did Virginia Tech come up with sort of standards of practice or guidelines or anything like that for renaming?
I believe that there definitely has been discussion. I was originally, it's actually quite an intricate sort of flowchart of certain groups and meetings, and I've only ever really been bestowed upon the sort of the guest vote ability very recently, but I was a part of sort of a subgroup of that they came up with guidelines for many different things as far as memorials that should be instituted on campus. And I have no doubt that there's definitely certain criteria, but I know it's quite a big process, and the institution now is sort of going with a policy or sort of a vision called Vision 2022, and 2022 would be, I believe, our sesquicentennial. So the university is trying to implement a lot of different changes, and I don't doubt that there is many different guidelines of many different things that they want to see renamed, things that they want to see added on. So I hope that answers your question. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Juan, I'd like to follow up with a question too. I also just want to say that your quote, "Legacy is fluid, renaming is not erasure." I think that's a very important comment and something to keep in mind. But I wanted to ask, looking at this yearbook, do you see that as sort of the social media of its day? We see how social media today reveals the past of many folks, particularly in January 6th insurrection. We can track people through social media, and this is sort of a way of tracking Claudius Lee. Do you see the yearbook in that sort of light for illuminating character or personalities or acts?
Right. Well, absolutely. And I think that's an awesome question, because I absolutely do sort of see it as the social media of the day. But in that, I see it as, number one, sort of the social media of things that you can put out, you help create. But also, much like social media, what you put out is out forever. And I think when interpreting things such as this is a part of your legacy, and in no uncertain terms that Claudius Lee greatly impacted the course of the university and dedicated really his life to the university, to the point where his things that he's contributed to cannot be erased. But I think it really speaks to the comfortability of sort of something like a yearbook being permanently implemented into the documents, in the publications of a university. And I obviously can't make any generalizations of character, but again, as I said earlier, that there's many different ways we can remember someone, and his accomplishments are absolutely not erased. But universities are areas, and they're now trying to achieve certain goals of inclusivity, and I look at it now more as a place of comfort for marginalized students. So sort of living in that, not necessarily erasing and pretending Claudius Lee never attended or was never a professor, but definitely there are definitely different ways to remember him, as I've just presented, and in history, and his and those accomplishments are not completely gone. However, the renaming, I do believe, was absolutely the best decision.
Yes, yes, and we have another question for you from the chat, and that says, as a member of the Council on History, can you talk about the recent process that resulted in the renaming of the building? Were there objections to renaming, and if so, on what grounds?
Right, absolutely. So there definitely was some backlash, more from alumni, and for a number of reasons. And I think that again, this is about a 22-year fight from 1997 until 2020. And I think really up until recently, it was not necessarily the popular opinion of professors to rename, but rather to put new buildings up, to do different things, to memorialize, to sort of meet in the middle of some sort of appeasement or amelioration of feelings or tensions. But I will say that within within the meeting, there were definitely some professors that were number one. At first, they were quite apprehensive, and then by 2020, especially speaking to just the movement of civil rights in the summer of 2020, were sort of then swayed. There were some obviously backlash of alumni, and of course there were some people that are like, oh well, Robert E. Lee was a great person. I was like, that's not even the Lee we're going for. But definitely some professors that felt that Claudius Lee's accomplishments outweighed the impacts of this yearbook he was editor-in-chief of. But it eventually led to a unanimous decision, and there was definitely more time spent on what the other building names should be, rather than
Right.
should it be renamed. It's definitely something to be approached rather of the universe, symbolizing that the university can move forward rather than erasure. Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Juan. And
Yeah,
we've got just like a minute left, but I'd like for us to hang out for a second because I'd like to talk to Sharon. Sharon, I loved your opening comment, your opening story about the lion and the hunter. That's something that I was unfamiliar with, but it was a perfect theme for your topic. I was really moved by the reconstruction of Middletown, and even retaining the original features as well as an outhouse seems very emotional. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Just a second. The Middletown is real personal with me because my family was the original principal, was my uncle. My family, I went to school there and didn't realize that more people didn't realize that it was a segregated school. It was passed by on a daily basis. When it went into, when it was abandoned due to the integration of the schools, it attempted there for a minute to be a community center. That's some of the slides that I wasn't able to show, but it was a community center, but it didn't have the backing of the financial backing to do what it needed to do to maintain its existence. So when the college began to shore up and establish connection with it. So now it's a main facility. In fact, they've added 2 more buildings behind it, but they have kept the structural integrity. They've kept the windows, the accordion doors. So they have, it really is a it's one of the few Rosenwald schools that's still being used for educational purposes right now. So I don't know if that answered any of your.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes. Well, it looks like we're out of time, and I would like to thank our speakers today. These were 3 really terrific presentations, and I enjoyed each one of them. I hope that you did too. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you at another session.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Juan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Glad to share the time with y'all.
Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.